Terminator 2D No Fate might look like just another retro action game full of explosions and nostalgia, but once you reach the bosses, the game shifts gears. And I'm not just talking about massive health bars and attacks that take up half the screen. There are hidden details, breakable patterns, tricks the game doesn't explain, and some classic 90s cheap moves that catch even those who think they've seen it all. That's why today I've put together 10 things nobody told you about the bosses in Terminator 2D No Fate. Some will make you feel embarrassed for not noticing them sooner, while others could literally save your credits, or your continues. I'm Matthew, and let's get straight to the list. This is one of those tips that sounds simple on paper, but completely changes how you face the game. Treat bosses as patterns, not chaos. When I started, I would enter the arena wanting to wing it through sheer grit, reacting to everything in a panic. But the game clearly rewards a different mindset. Observe, survive long enough, and turn what feels like pressure into a routine. What helps me most is dedicating the first 1 or 2 attempts as study sessions, rather than serious attempts to win. I pay attention to what triggers each phase, what kind of pause the boss takes between attacks, and the rhythm of the cycle. Once you accept losing those first few fights just to map out the behavior, the boss stops being a wall and becomes a sequence you execute. This is where the bosses are predictable point comes in. Once you memorize the order, you start positioning yourself before the attack happens, instead of running away after things have already gone south. It gives you a great sense of control, making it feel like you've switched from panic mode to professional mode, reading the game as if the fight were in slow motion. In Factory Defenses, Level 3, the core example is perfect. Bombs in groups of 3, then 2. When I realized this, I stopped running in zigzags trying to improvise and started using the logic of the pattern to my advantage. Staying directly under it when only 2 fall is the kind of detail that looks risky, but in practice becomes a safe spot specifically because you already know that third bomb isn't coming. Instead of thinking, this boss is unfair, you start thinking, okay, what's the trick to this cycle? And when you finally pass, it's not just relief, it's the satisfaction of having decoded the system and executed it perfectly. This tip about keeping constant movement is practically a survival rule in this game. Whenever I stand still just for a second, thinking I have time to aim better, the game immediately reminds me that fast projectiles are unforgiving. So I started treating movement as part of the attack. I don't stop to hit, I hit while repositioning. What works for me is thinking of 3 tools with very clear roles. Roll to pass through immediate danger, jump to break the line of fire, and slide to get out of the way without losing momentum. When you mix these with small changes in direction, you become a pattern that's hard to punish. The most interesting part is that when you're always moving, you see openings more calmly because you're not stuck in one spot waiting for the impact to hit. There's also a mental side to this. Constant movement reduces that freeze we get when the screen fills up with projectiles. If I force myself to keep moving, even if it's just side to side, I maintain control of the situation. It sounds silly, but this habit prevents you from becoming an easy target and gives you time to read what's coming next. Against the Centurion, Level 4, this becomes very evident during the machine gun fire. I keep moving back and forth, not overdoing it, just enough to stay out of the direct line of the bullet stream. The trick is not to let this turn into panic. It's a conscious back and forth, as if you're dancing away from the center of danger. And when the missiles with the red crosshairs appear, I treat it as a command. See red, roll. If I try to run and pray, I usually take the missile at the end of the path. If I roll with the right timing, I pass through the threat and come out ready to reposition for the next attack. In the end, this boss becomes less of a damage test and more of a test of discipline. Whoever keeps moving and respects the game's signals passes much more consistently. This tip about using cover and smart positioning is the kind of thing that made me realize the game isn't just about reflexes, it's about reading the space. When I started, I stayed in the middle of the screen out of habit, as if it were the safest place. But in a firefight, the middle is almost always the worst spot because you become a target from every angle and lose track of where things are coming from. What changed my game was starting to think of the screen as a board. Walls, edges, and slopes aren't just for decoration, they are tools. If I can break the enemy's line of fire for half a second, that's enough to reposition, reset my rhythm, and pick a better time to strike. When you do this right, it feels like the difficulty drops an entire level because the game stops being about surviving the chaos and starts being about controlling the range. There's also a psychological detail I really like. Using cover takes away that feeling of always chasing the problem. Instead of reacting to every bullet, I force the enemy to waste attacks on empty air. Then the combat becomes cleaner because you don't need to win with speed, but with decisions. Where to stay, when to leave, and for how long to expose yourself. In Bandit Bob, level 1, the example of crouching on the opposite edge is gold. If he's on the left, you go to the right, crouch, and let him shoot at nothing because his angle simply doesn't connect with where you're positioned. When I discovered this, it was that aha moment of, oh, so this is how the game wants me to think. Because you realize not every confrontation is meant to be faced head on. The coolest part is that this logic applies to the rest of the game. Whenever there's crossfire or sequential projectiles, I try to disappear into the level geometry instead of fighting for space with brute force. Cover isn't cowardice, it's efficiency. And when you master it, you start dictating the pace of combat rather than just surviving it. This tip of prioritizing the main target is one of the hardest to follow because it goes against the instinct to clear the screen. I also have that habit of wanting to destroy everything that appears as if it were the safest way to move forward. But in Terminator 2D, doing that often just makes you waste ammo, time, and focus. And that's exactly where the game punishes you. When I started thinking of the weak point as the actual objective of the fight, combat became simpler and more strategic. I stopped treating every enemy as an obligation and start seeing what is an immediate threat versus what is a distraction. This doesn't mean ignoring everything, but consciously deciding, is this stopping me from hitting the boss right now? Or is it just trying to make me waste resources? In Factory Defenses, level 3, destroying only the central core is the best example of this philosophy. The fact that the laser turret is destructible is a trap, because it gives you that feeling of, hey, I can neutralize this too. But if you shift your attention to the turret, you lengthen the fight, take more risks, and worse, burn ammo that would make a difference later. I like to think of it as a war economy. You don't win by proving you can blow up every piece of the scenery. You win by eliminating what actually keeps the level alive. So, I go in with a damage plan for the core, doing the bare minimum to keep breathing and avoiding picking fights with things I don't need to. When it works, it feels like you cleared the level with cold efficiency, not desperation. And saving ammo for the guards at the end is the detail that ties it all together, because the game usually tests you right after you're relieved to have passed the big obstacle. If you reach that part dry, you feel like the level caught you in a trap. But if you focus on the core and only remove what's truly in your way, you reach the end with resources and confidence. And that, to me, is worth more than destroying a turret just because you can. Mastering dodges and jumps with the right timing is, for me, the moment the game stops being about enduring hits and starts being about playing with style. When you hit a perfect roll, it doesn't just feel like you dodged. It feels like you canceled a danger and repositioned exactly where the game wanted you to be. The more you practice, the more you understand that the dodge isn't an escape, it's space control. I usually train this in a specific way, not by trying to win the fight immediately, but by repeating the same situation until my body understands the timing. For example, I'll go in, bait the attack, observe the exact point where the hitbox actually connects, and roll a split second later than my instinct suggests. In 2D action games, we almost always dodge too early out of anxiety, and then we take the hit during the recovery. The cool thing about a perfect roll is that it puts you in the right position to counterattack instead of just saving you. You start rolling for an advantage, a better angle, an empty space, a damage window. When this clicks, the combat takes on a much more aggressive rhythm because you aren't waiting for the storm to pass, you're passing through the storm and hitting back in the middle of it. In the HK Bomber, level 5, the game tests you exactly on this because it mixes several layers of threats at once. When the bombs with red targets appear, I prepare myself to jump down before impact, like a conditioned reflex. From there, it's fine reading, moving between electric beams without panicking, and saving the jump to clear the shockwaves at the right moment without wasting the jump early. What I like most about this boss is that it forces you to stop improvising and start executing. When you finally nail the sequence, dropping before the bombs, weaving through beams, and calmly jumping the shockwave, you feel like you've cracked the code of the fight. That confidence spreads to the rest of the game, because after that, you start seeing patterns and timings everywhere, not just in the HK Bomber. One tip that completely changed my way of playing Terminator 2D was to stop treating weapons as just more damage and start seeing each one as a tool. When I used the same approach for every confrontation, I'd pass the levels, but always with that feeling that I was winning through sheer stubbornness. From the moment I truly started experimenting with the arsenal, the fights became more controlled and honestly, a lot more fun. The point is simple. Not every boss responds the same way to the same type of pressure. Some bosses punish you if you spend too much time aiming. Some fill the screen with threats and demand you clear space fast. And some only open a tiny window for you to land damage. If you insist on only one weapon, you end up fighting the battle's design more than the boss itself. Grenades, for example, became my can't go wrong choice when the game starts crowding the area with danger. They help control space, deal with multiple targets/parts, and prevent you from getting cornered while trying to understand the boss's pattern. I like to use grenades as a way to keep the fight breathable, creating space to reposition and avoiding that domino effect where one slip-up turns into 3. On the other hand, more precise weapons, like lasers, come in when the fight demands discipline. If the boss has specific weak points, short windows, or movements that force you to punish from a distance, precision is worth its weight in gold. In those moments, I try to play it almost like a consistency test. Less spamming, more calm, aiming at what really matters, and taking every opening as a unique opportunity. This is very clear in the final boss of level 12, Future War Retaliation. There, I felt firsthand that sticking to my favorite was asking for trouble, because the fight shifts rhythm and demands different responses. When I switch it up, grenades to control chaotic moments and lasers to punish with precision, the battle stops being a desperate struggle and becomes an execution. That's when you feel like you're hunting the machine, not the other way around. One of the things that helped me most was to stop seeing dying and trying again as automatic training, and start practicing on purpose in level training and replays. When you repeat a section with intention, you start seeing the game as a map of information, where the enemy spawns, where the shot comes from, which corner is a trap. The feeling shifts from "the game caught me by surprise" to "I know exactly what's going to happen, I just need to execute." What I love about training is that it takes the pressure off progress and puts the pressure on improvement. You're not there to reach the boss, but to reach them with plenty of mental stamina to spare. Instead of wasting all your lives learning the hard way, you turn mistakes into data. Okay, there's always a spawn on the right here. This trap activates if I move too fast. If I stay at this spot, I get a free punishment. Another huge advantage is learning the spawns and traps before the boss, because often the real damage doesn't come from the boss itself. It comes from the path leading up to it. I've reached important fights with few resources and little patience because the previous section drained me. When I replay and clean up that segment, I enter the boss fight more intact, with more consistency and, most importantly, more confidence. In the case of the Centurion, level 4, training is almost mandatory if you want to tame the fight properly. I use practice to understand the timing of the blue boosters, when it's worth grabbing them, when to save them, and when they become bait to put you in a bad position. It's also for memorizing the pauses between the previous mini-boss's volleys, because those micro windows are exactly where you breathe, reposition, and avoid taking silly damage before the main confrontation. The best moment is when everything clicks. You reach the Centurion and realize you aren't reacting, you're anticipating. The boosters stop being an improvisation and become part of the plan, and the mini-boss sequences stop feeling like chaos and turn into a rhythm. For me, that's when Terminator 2D becomes that kind of addictive game. Not because it gets easy, but because it clearly rewards those who study and execute. One of the cleverest discoveries I made was treating hidden continues as part of my boss fight preparation, rather than just a random bonus. Before, I'd rush through areas because I was in a hurry to see the boss, only to get steamrolled without any room to learn. When you start hunting for these continues before big fights, the game's dynamic changes. You're no longer betting everything on a single attempt. The detail that makes this tip so strong is that these continues reset at the boss checkpoint without penalty. In practice, this means you can use the boss fight as a laboratory, test strategies, understand patterns, risk positioning, and still come back with your insurance intact. If you need to, you can even exit and return to align things exactly how you want, which is basically a free pass to train with less frustration. For me, the difference is mainly mental. When I know I have a continue saved up, I play better because I don't freeze. Instead of thinking, I can't mess up, I think, I'm going to learn the right window. I'm going to force the second phase. I'm going to see what happens if I play more aggressively. It sounds minor, but in a difficult game, this shift in mindset is half the battle. The clearest example is in level 12, after the tank. There's a moment when you're heading towards the elevator, and if you shoot the wooden crate on the right, a continue drops out. It's the kind of secret you'd miss if you were on autopilot, but once you know, it becomes a ritual. Finish the tank, breathe, break the box, secure the continue, and then head up to what matters. What I love most is that this rewards curiosity in a very practical way. It's not just, oh, I found a cool secret. It's, I reached the boss with a safety net and can play with intelligence, not desperation. If you're stuck on the heavier bosses, this is one of those tips that doesn't give you more damage or health, but gives you something even more valuable: consistency. Saving power-ups and grenades for bosses is a type of discipline that took me a while to learn. At first, I'd see a group of common enemies and think, okay, a grenade will fix this, just to clear the screen quickly and move on. But after a few levels, it becomes clear that the game wants to catch you exactly when you hit a big encounter without resources. And that's when you realize you spent your best arsenal to save 5 seconds. For me, the key is treating power-ups and grenades as an advantage button, not a crutch. Common enemies can usually be handled with positioning, movement, and patience, even if it takes a bit longer. Mini-bosses and bosses, however, have more health, more aggressive patterns, and less room for error. So anything that shortens the fight also reduces the time you're exposed to damage. I also like to think of it as risk management. The longer a difficult fight lasts, the higher the chance you'll make a silly mistake. Grenades shorten the battle, and by doing so, decrease the number of perfect decisions the game demands of you. It's not just about doing more damage. It's about turning a long, stressful combat into a quick, controlled execution. In the level 5 mini-boss, this fits perfectly because he jumps between edges and tries to force you into a panic reaction. When I do it right, I stay on the opposite side, maintain my space, and use the roll to neutralize his approach. The grenade acts as the accelerator. You don't need to dance with him for as long, just enough to maintain safety and repeat the damage window. The best feeling is when you reach the right encounter with your pockets full and realize that, this time, you are in control. Instead of surviving on the edge, you decide when the fight ends. Once you internalize this, your progress becomes much more consistent because you stop depending on luck and start depending on planning. After I finish the campaign, I always feel like there's an entire game still hidden in there. The boss rush. It's not just an extra mode to pad content. For me, it's where you truly realize if you learned the bosses or if you just got past them through improvisation and resources. The fact that it unlocks after one run makes it feel like a final test, like the game saying, okay, now show me you've mastered it. Boss Rush has a huge advantage. It gives you direct repetition without the fluff. You don't have to cross levels or redo tedious parts. It's just fight after fight, exactly how a player who wants to truly improve likes it. In just a few attempts, you start noticing patterns that went unnoticed during the campaign, because there, you reach the boss tired, with low health, and sometimes win without even fully understanding how. Now, my favorite part for training is imposing a rule on myself. Play without pipe bombs. It sounds cruel at first, but that's exactly what forces you to learn spacing, timing, and true punishment. Without that panic button, every mistake feels more honest, and every success feels more earned. Plus, it's the kind of practice that prepares you for both trophies and that sense of real mastery. I also like to do a precision focus challenge. Only aimed shots, right in line with the laser focus achievement from level 1. When you bring this mindset to Boss Rush, it turns into consistency training rather than just blowing things up. Bosses like Bandit Bob or the HK Bomber change completely when you decide you aren't going to sweep the screen, but rather hit what matters at the right time without wasting a window. In the end, Boss Rush becomes my favorite benchmark for the game. If I can get through an entire sequence playing clean, without pipe bombs and with well-placed shots, I know I'm not just memorizing patterns, I'm controlling the fight. And that's when Terminator 2D gets addictive in a different way. Not through the chaos, but through the satisfaction of making everything look easy because you actually got better.